Have you ever trusted someone so completely that the idea of them hurting you seemed impossible? Have you ever looked into someone's eyes, your classmate, your neighbor, your fiancé, and thought, there's no way they could ever be capable of something truly evil? That's where this story begins, with trust, with a bright young man, studying medicine, charming, polite, engaged to the love of his life, future doctor, no violent record, no red flags, just a nearly perfect reputation, and yet, lurking beneath that clean white lab coat, behind the comforting smile and kind eyes, was a double life, a world nobody saw coming, a world filled with hidden usernames, hotel, appointments, zip ties, and the coldest kind of silence. This isn't a story about a typical killer. There are no warnings scrawled on the walls, no serial number, tattoos, no horror movie masks. He looked just like us, maybe better. And that's what made him so dangerous. He didn't need to hide in the shadows. He was already hiding in plain sight. Tonight, we enter the world of a man who fooled everyone. But the scariest part? If things had gone just a little differently, he might have fooled us all till the very end. This is the true story of Philip Markoff, the man the world would come to know as the Craigslist killer. It was every parent's dream, a clean-cut, Ivy League caliber med student, tall, good-looking, engaged to a beautiful woman, no criminal record, no red flags, just a driven young man on track to become a respected doctor. But dreams, as we've learned again and again, can be deceiving. And sometimes the people we admire most are the people we should fear. This story doesn't begin with police, sirens, or a frantic 911 call. It begins in quiet lecture halls, university campuses, a desk full of books, a worn stethoscope, a young man with perfect grades and a brilliant future ahead. Philip Markoff was everything a medical student ought to be. He volunteered at hospitals, held the door for professors, answered questions thoughtfully, smiled the right way, dressed well, didn't party much, didn't raise concerns, didn't stand out in the wrong ways. But Philip was watching, studying. Not just anatomy, not just medical journals. He was studying women. Ads, patterns. Behavior from the outside. He was planning a wedding. On the inside, he was planning something else. It had started small. Casual browsing, late-night internet searches, Backpage, Craigslist, chat rooms, personal ads, women offering massages, companionship, erotic services. Click, click, click. At first, maybe it was curiosity, but it didn't stay that way. Philip didn't just want to look, he wanted to take. April 10th, 2009, Marriott Copley Place, Boston. Julissa Brisman had been working in massage therapy. Not the ordinary kind, but the kind quietly solicited through modeling or relaxation massage ads on Craigslist. It was discreet, it paid well, it was common. She booked clients in hotels, ran appointments professionally. No drugs, no drama. That Friday night, she'd checked into room 1029. She texted a friend, "I have a client, shouldn't be long." She'd been in contact earlier with a man who asked for a quick appointment, gave a name and a time, polite, to the point, nothing alarming. 9:45 p.m. She texts again, "He's here." What happened next is anyone's guess, because just 20 minutes later, hotel staff were calling for help. A fire alarm had gone off. The system had sensed smoke. but there was no fire. What there was a body. Julissa Brisman was found on the floor, blood smeared along the doorway, her clothing partially removed, her skull fractured from multiple blunt impacts, and 3 gunshot wounds to the chest. Nothing was stolen, no signs of forced entry. Everything of value still there. Only one thing was missing: her life. The room key recorded that it had been opened once, exactly at 9:47 p.m., and not accessed again. Security footage showed a man entering the hotel lobby at 9:41 p.m. White, medium build, baseball cap, backpack.com/average, harmless, even. He entered the elevator 24 minutes later. He exited the same way. No panic, no running, just walking. Like anyone else, police studied the tapes for hours. They didn't know who he was, but they knew he would strike again. 4 days later, he did. Tuesday, April 14th, Westin Hotel, Boston. Cynthia Melton was working in Boston temporarily. On the side, she'd responded to clients through Craigslist to offer modeling and massage. That afternoon, a man booked an appointment using nearly the exact wording as the one Julissa had received. Same keywords, same tone. He arrived, polite, asked for rates, closed the door behind him, and then everything changed. He pulled out a gun and told her to lie on the bed. He pulled out zip ties, but Cynthia wasn't Julissa. She resisted, screamed, kicked, slammed the nightstand. And something about that moment, whether it was the noise outside or panic in her voice, spooked him. He ran fast before he could tie her up, before he could do whatever he had planned. This time, he left behind something valuable. Plastic zip ties with fingerprints, a hotel surveillance clip showing his full body, and testimony from a living witness who could describe his face. They had more now, not a name, but a clearer picture. Tall, white, 20s, well-groomed, smart, intentional, and clearly organized. He had a pattern. He was calculating, and he was escalating. Boston police began analyzing digital records tied to the Craigslist ad responses. They traced login data from the email address used to set the appointments, a throwaway Gmail account, .andy_enfield88@gmail.1 login stood out. It pinged off the IP address of a Comcast account based in Quincy, Massachusetts, about 20 minutes south of Boston. The billing address, a second-floor apartment on 22 High Point Circle, belonging to a young couple, one of whom was Philip Markoff, medical student, Boston University, engaged, no criminal history. The contrast was shocking. Detectives got a team together. Quiet surveillance began. Unmarked cars. Binoculars. They watched as Philip took out trash, went to Dunkin' Donuts, shopped with his fiancée. He wasn't nervous. He didn't check over his shoulder. He didn't look like a man being hunted. But he was. Police began digging deeper, and everything started to unravel. They requested camera footage from stores around Quincy. One hardware store had receipts that matched items found at the crime scenes. Plastic zip ties, duct tape, rubber gloves, purchased with cash, young white male. Baseball cap, the same man, still no warrant, but the net was tightening. They needed more. Investigators went to the ISPs. They matched timestamps from the burner emails. Then, a hit. His home IP had been used to log in to the burner email shortly after the ad was responded to. That was enough. It was a link. The emails to Julissa and Cynthia had been routed through Philip's network. evidence in place, surveillance in motion. They waited. April 20th, 2009, mid-morning, Philip and his fiancée, Megan, were driving south on Interstate 95, headed toward Foxwoods Casino, planning a weekend getaway before finals. Police pulled them over just before the tolls. Backup units swarmed. Philip raised nothing more than an eyebrow. Under the seat, officers found a hollowed-out copy of Gray's Anatomy, the classic medical textbook. Inside that hollowed book, a 9mm semi-automatic pistol, matching caliber to the one that killed Julissa, along with duct tape, gloves, plastic ties, a pair of women's underwear, a loaded magazine, in his backpack, a laptop showing saved screenshots of Craigslist erotic ads. Some were his own test ads, never posted publicly, just written. Others were saved ads from escorts, massage providers, dancers, with listings, dates, rates, stamped and categorized. This wasn't a phase. This wasn't curiosity. This was ritual. They arrested him on the spot. Murder, kidnapping, armed robbery, weapons charges. Megan froze. She kept saying, on camera, there must be some mistake. There has to be some mistake. This isn't Philip. He would never. But the evidence, silent as it was, screamed back home. Police tore through Philip's and Megan's apartment. More zip ties, more duct tape, a second loaded magazine for a 9mm, disposable phones, fake email drafts, a bullet casing inside a drawer. Everything matched back at headquarters. Philip Markoff said nothing. Not to detectives, not to his parents, not to Megan. He asked for a lawyer. That was all. He didn't cry. He didn't beg. He sat, quietly, cold, removed, as if nothing had happened, as if the mask had already slipped, and he had no further use for it. The press moved fast. The story broke nationally within hours. Craigslist, killer arrested. Papers sold out across Boston. Websites crashed under traffic. Parents were terrified. Craigslist suspended its adult services page. The face of the killer, a clean-shaven all-star with a white coat and class ring. It didn't make sense. That made it more dangerous. The FBI knew killers like Philip didn't erupt. They evolved quietly. The questions came quickly, but the answers never did. Why would someone like Philip Markoff do this? He had no history of violence, not even a school fight, no drug use, no disciplinary warnings. His records were pristine. His professors praised him. His patients liked him. His family admired him. But now his face was on every screen in New England. Students in the Boo Medical Library were watching their classmate get perp-walked in a prison jumpsuit. Strangers walked past his engagement photos in the tabloids. Megan, his fiancée, was bombarded by reporters camped outside her door. She didn't run. She didn't hide. She stood up and made a statement. She said, and I quote, "Philip is a loving man. I am standing by him. I know he is innocent. This is not the man I know." But inside, something was splintering. What do you do when the man you're about to marry gets arrested for murder? When there's a gun in his book bag, panties in his drawers, duct tape in his car? Do you still believe in him? Or do you lie to protect the world you built? As detectives built their timeline, the truth behind Philip's perfect mask got uglier. He had been chatting with dozens of women online. He used fake names: Andy, Mike, Sean, Tyler. He used burner accounts, VPNs, prepaid phones. He had bookmarked certain ads, opened others hundreds of times, and they discovered something else. Philip wasn't just browsing erotic services, he was responding to them. He had set up fake appointments, send times, left clues. His digital footprint was enormous, but hidden in fragments. It took federal analysts days to assemble, but it showed what nobody expected. Philip had been looking for victims for weeks. He sent messages as kind, as charming, as discreet as any other client would. Nothing aggressive, nothing creepy, nothing illegal. But when one woman didn't respond fast enough, he sent her a single-line reply. "You'll regret that." She shrugged it off, but 7 days later, Julissa Brisman would be dead as the evidence mounted. Philip's digital life led into territory few expected. Not just erotic services, not just massages. He was browsing crime forums. He was searching for traceable methods. How police track Craigslist ads. How long do fingerprints last on plastic? Where to shoot to kill. The browser history was skeletal, but damning still. Even as the headlines exploded, Philip stayed quiet. He didn't confess. He didn't cry. He didn't seem afraid. He acted like a surgeon in the waiting room. Cold, focused, waiting for the next procedure. Inside his holding cell at the Nashua Street jail, Philip was placed on constant suicide watch. At 6'4" and 220 pounds, he stood out among the inmates. He didn't fight, didn't scream or protest. He asked for newspapers. He asked for pence. He wrote letters to Megan, still calling her my darling, still talking about the wedding. He told her to ignore the media. He promised explanations after trial. On day 4, he tried to kill himself. He snapped a shoelace from his sneaker, tied it through the bars, and attempted to hang himself in the dead of night. But the guards spotted him in time. They rushed in. He fought, screamed, bit one of them on the hand. He was sedated and written up for assaulting staff. But his suicide attempt put him into an even deeper isolation. Only legal visits allowed. Only lights off at designated times. Only jail clothes under 24/7 monitoring. The man who once shadowed cardiac surgeries was now eating off paper trays. The man who once lived for control now had none, and still, he said nothing. The public was obsessed. Every day brought a new headline. The pretty boy killer, medical student turned monster. Boston butcher had a wedding website. Reporters hounded his classmates. Medical school administrators suspended him immediately and released a single statement: "We are shocked, horrified, and fully cooperating with authorities." Megan disappeared from the spotlight for a while. When she re-emerged, she'd changed. She looked worn down, pale, hollow. She had been staying with her parents in New Jersey. When asked by a reporter if she still believed in Philip's innocence, she paused, then simply replied, "People can be very good at hiding." She broke off the engagement, deleted their wedding site. The beach wedding was canceled. Her dress remained unwor in jail. They handed Philip the letter where she ended it. He didn't cry. He folded it into a square and tucked it into his shirt pocket. The evidence against him was undeniable. Ballistics matched the bullet in Julissa's chest to the 9mm in his storage box. Zip tie fingerprints matched his DNA. One of the discarded gloves had both his DNA and Julissa's blood. In total, 3 different victims had physical or direct forensic links to Markov's items. prosecutors considered the case. Airtight. Life without parole may be worse if they could prove intent to kill. If they could tie his searches to his actions, they could pursue first-degree murder with special circumstances. But his defense lawyers began building their angle. They were ready to argue. Mental illness. They found no prior record, no substance history. No deviant charges. They argued Philip's whole life had been spent on edge, managing perfection, chasing impossible expectations. One slip, one crack, and the whole fantasy collapsed. But the prosecution didn't buy it. There was no mental detachment during the attacks, no mania on camera. Everything about Philip was calculated, planned, executed, predatory. He, detection, and hid his weapons inside a medical textbook. That wasn't a mental break. That was a killer who understood systems, laws, crime scenes, and how to get around them. Meanwhile, inside court, Jaleesa Brisman's mother sat one row behind Philip every appearance. She never said a word to him, never looked away, just watched, waiting. Reports said. Philip never acknowledged her, never flinched, never bowed his head, just sat in silence. A month went by, then 2, then 6 months. Philip fused. Plea offers. Refused to talk. Refused interviews. His lawyer said he was committed to proving his innocence in court. Behind the scenes, jail staff were worried. On August 14, 2010, Philip was booked into his nightly check. Cell camera shows him brushing his teeth, reading. Writing something on the wall. No alarms, nothing triggered. That morning, at 10:06 a.m., a corrections officer found him on the floor, blood on the sheets. Arteries slit at the ankles, thighs, and neck. A makeshift scalpel from a issued razor blade. He had written a name on the wall in blood. Megan scrawled 5 times. A marriage date carved into the wall next to it. Their original wedding date. He had taken prescription medicine, created a poisoning effect, then swallowed paper towel to cut off his throat. It was a suicide designed to work. There would be no second rescue, no third life, nothing left. He died at 24 years old. No trial, no sentence, no closure. The public exploded. Some called him a coward, a monster who cheated his victims. Again, others said his death was justice, swift, final, deserved. But for the families of his victims, there would be no final day in court, no testimony from survivors, no moment of sentencing, just an abandoned jail cell, a stained wall, and silence. Autopsy confirmed the method, the cuts, intentional, the drugs, pre-stacked in dosage strips. He had been collecting them for 3 weeks, bit by bit. Waiting. His final plan was disappearing. The story didn't end there, because after his death, federal analysts kept digging. They found more usernames, more backups, more deleted messages. Several accounts traced to his alias showed appointment requests to at least 4 other women outside Massachusetts. 2 in New York. 2 in Rhode Island. One woman came forward, anonymously, said she met with him at a hotel near Albany 2 weeks before Jaleesa's murder. He'd paid in cash, was kind, polite. She said something about his face gave her chills. Watching the trial play out on the news had shaken her to core. She'd only seen him once, but she said, "I swear to God, it was him. But I got lucky. Nothing happened." Maybe he was preparing. Maybe he was practicing. FBI believed he had more victims in mind. that Julissa wasn't the beginning, and may not have been the end. But without a statement, without a trial, we single quotes, LL never know. His apartment with Megan was cleaned out. The rental company had the carpet replaced, the books removed. The fridge was still full. She had never gone back after his arrest. His toothbrush, coded study notes, and unopened wedding cards. Man who once held scalpels to save turned them on himself to escape. The Craigslist killer, Philip Markoff. What made him do it? No one truly knows. There were no abusive parents, no violent history, no trauma on record. Some say he just snapped. Others believe he was always hiding something darker behind the white lab coat, behind the wedding ring, behind the perfect grades. What we can say for certain is that some of the most terrifying killers don't look like monsters. They don't have wild eyes or twisted teeth. They don't stalk dark alleys sometimes. They sit politely in class, blend in, wear stethoscopes, walk out of hotel elevators, smooth as anything, and melt back into crowds, just shadows in nice shoes, gone before anyone thinks twice. They don't take your money, your name, your things. They take your power, your breath, your body, and they walk away like it never happened. Philip Markoff wore one mask in public and a much darker one in private. Nobody saw behind it until it cracked wide open. But by then, the damage was done, and he was already writing his final chapter in blood. In blood. The news cycle had moved on. The crowds faded. The courtroom stayed dark, and Megan McAllister was trying to disappear. She deleted social media. She returned to New Jersey, started using her maiden name again. But no matter where she went, whispers followed. She'd been engaged to a murderer. The cards on her wedding table had turned into evidence tags, her bridal photos into warnings. People speculated endlessly. Did she know? Did she ever suspect? Was she covering for him? Was she a target? But Megan stayed silent. She didn't write a book, didn't sell the story, didn't give interviews, and maybe that was her way of healing, just getting away, letting what was buried stay buried. She had only ever wanted one thing, a simple life with the man she loved. But that man never existed, and Philip Markoff wasn't done haunting her. Years after his suicide, handwritten drafts of letters were found among his jail belongings, unsent notes. One of them addressed her directly. He wrote, "You were the only light, the only truth. I lost myself in the dark, but I'll always remember the sound of your laugh during that first rain in Boston. If there's another life, I'll find you again. In this life, I release you." The pen ran out halfway through the next sentence. Page torn. That letter, sealed, was never delivered, but it was cataloged by police, and it remains locked in an evidence room somewhere. A piece of a past that no one wants to open again. No real motive was ever proven. No confessions, no manifestos, just fragments. But psychologists kept digging. They studied the case for months. Criminologists broke him down. Some said narcissism. Some said sexual sadism. Others argued it was control addiction, that Philip didn't care about the sex, or violence, or even money. He cared about the hunt, the setup, the game. One quote from the psychiatric eval file reads, "The offender demonstrates an unemotional, logic-driven methodology. He is neither hysterical nor impulsive. There's no thrill-seeking behavior in the classic sense. It is calculation disguised as curiosity." But how does someone like that form? His childhood wasn't violent. He had friends. He dated normally. He played sports by all known accounts. He had a completely functional upbringing. But there were clues, quiet ones. Former classmates recalled how intense Philip got when he felt challenged. He once blocked a roommate from entering their dorm suite because he hadn't asked permission. Another time, he was caught rearranging the hospital break room schedule when another tech covered his shift without asking. He didn't yell, he didn't argue, he just found ways to gain back control, professionally, socially, subtly. People called him a perfectionist, but some now believe he was something else. An obsessive-compulsive narcissist with suppressive anger issues. Not violent rage, but cold, buried pressure cooker fury. He didn't explode in public. He imploded in secret. And when disconnects appeared in his life, he built backup plans, admits, deletes, repeats, a pattern of fail-safes, psych profiles. Showed he updated his Craigslist hunting behavior after every attempt. He changed devices, browsers, even swapped vocabulary in ad responses to test which women reacted how. He learned quickly, adapted faster. He was coding real-world behavior into his attacks, testing reactions. The smarter he got, the more dangerous he became. And remember, his second victim survived only because he made a miscalculation. That's what stopped a spree. Not a conscience, just noise, bad timing, a locked door down the hall. The theory remains that had Cynthia Melton not fought back, we'd be looking at not one murder, but a series of them. Some experts believe he was gearing up for multiple murders within the same day, a frenzy rampage documented via disposable video. Police never found actual tapes or photos of the attacks, but they did find one final clue. On his laptop's encrypted drive, they recovered a deleted folder. It was named Collection within the remnants of deleted thumbnails. Digital forensics described hundreds of partially recovered image files. Most were corrupt, but a handful showed screenshots of hotels, empty hallways, photos of floors and suites. Taken from Craigslist, ad posts women posed in front of mirrors, beds, windows, places Philip never visited, but might have marked. He never got the chance to go. Further, he was caught first, but was he preparing? Was he mapping? Was the collection a list, a trophy set, or something much worse? We'll never know. No files recovered showed photos of violence, but no files recovered showed his fiancée either. Philip Markoff's private digital world didn't overlap with his real one. There were no couple selfies saved, no scanned wedding registry, no emails to Megan, no celebration plans, just fragments, searches, folders, markers. Some cops believe he had dual systems, the light life and the hunting file, and Megan existed only in the light. One behavioral analyst said, serial predators in disguise often maintain perfect facades, not out of guilt, but out of arrogance. They don't believe they'll ever need to burn the cover. Philip was deeply invested in keeping both lives separate, but one moment cracked it all open. That night, when the fire alarm triggered and security entered that room before the hotel staff could smooth it over, that was the pivot point. Not even the best-laid plans survive chaos perfectly. Julissa Brisman probably never saw it coming. He messaged her as Andy taught polite, requested a massage offering cash of $200 for 30 minutes. He'd confirmed the hotel first, then delayed his arrival, sending a follow-up saying traffic was heavy. This eliminated any overlap with other guests entering the floor when he arrived. She likely let him in, expecting it to be quick. There were no signs of wrestling outside, only inside. The room was lit dimly. No pornographic material found, no paraphernalia, only the massage table, 2 bags, a towel, and her sandals. The blood splatter pattern showed. She had tried to run. He caught her near the bathroom. Police estimate the entire event lasted no more than 11 minutes, 9, if timed by camera entry to camera exit. It was cold, efficient, cruel, and silent, no. One in the neighboring rooms heard the shots. The silencer was never found. Police concluded it was either makeshift or pillow muffled. He'd brought zip ties, duct tape. He left with neither, only the weapon. And blood on his sleeve. He ditched the gloves in a trash can 3 blocks away. One set was recovered days later, with latex residue and partial DNA. By luck, one print survived sweat and degradation, and it was enough. A 3-minute trace with IP data sealed the confirmatory ID. Philip Markoff had left behind the exact things he always avoided. And finally, they caught the ghost in the elevator. Still, many questions remain. Was Megan ever suspicious of the things he was hiding? Could she have heard his planning? Investigators noted there was no sign of her involvement. All devices used were personal to him. No linked bank records, addresses, or commingled evidence outside the shared domicile. She wasn't charged, was never considered a CO-conspirator. But some believe it would have been impossible to share a home that small and not notice something. Then again, she was studying too. Interning. Keeping long hours. They were both high-achievement medical students, and trust was baked into their life. She knew him as the guy who made flashcards for neurochemistry breakdowns, brought her flowers on rotation exam weeks, and quoted medical mnemonics while watching TV. He didn't rage, he didn't drink. Philip was polite to waiters, spoke softly to her parents, smiled at children passing by on the street. The red flags were microscopic: filtered friendships, silent grudges, deleted web history, private work email accounts. To the average observer, it looked like someone preparing for a competitive residency application, not murder. He was engaged in the performance and he rehearsed it flawlessly in many ways. That's the most terrifying part about this story. Not the violence, but the invisibility of it. The fact that a so-called monster could blend in perfectly with society's best. Get top grades, be a loved partner, volunteer, shake hands with doctors, all while planning horror at night. Markoff's case now lives in textbooks, used in criminal psychology lectures, profiling seminars, and forensic science modules. He fits the prototype of the disguised predator: organized, controlled, attractive, educated, and utterly without empathy. He's compared to serials like Ted Bundy. But unlike Bundy, Markoff left almost no trail. No confessions. No recorded interviews. Only silence and scars. One psychiatrist said of him, if Bundy wanted to be loved, Markoff wanted to be forgotten. He didn't record memories, he erased them. And that's maybe why he ended it the way he did. Suicide in jail wasn't theatrical. It wasn't broadcast. He didn't use blood to confess or indict. He used his ex-fiancee's name and one date. That's all. No explanation, no list of victims, no apology, just a name. Some believe he couldn't live without the illusion that once Megan left him, there was no one to fool anymore, no performance to keep up. The theater was closed, so the actor ended his part. But others see it differently. They believe his death was an act of domination in itself, that by killing himself, he denied the victims justice, denied the court's evidence, denied the families a verdict. He kept control to the very end, and in that, he may have won. We hate to admit it when killers get the last move, but sometimes they do. Philip Markoff remains one of the most baffling criminal cases in modern U.S. murder history, not because of how many lives he took, but because of how easily he might have taken more. Nobody saw him coming, and if he hadn't slipped, if Cynthia hadn't fought, if one IP address hadn't pinged, we might never have known his name at all. He'd have disappeared back into hospital rotations, back into shade, back into his wedding suit, smiling, waiting, watching, and just one click from doing it again. The story should have ended with his death. But even in death, Philip Markoff left a trail of unease behind, because what the world was left with was a void, not just in closure, but in explanation. He never stood trial. No jury saw the evidence laid bare. No defense, no prosecution, no cross-examination, no moment where a courtroom heard him speak about who he truly was. What we have are puzzle pieces, frames of surveillance footage, scattered digital artifacts, plastic bindings, faint fingerprints, and a name written in blood. The rest is only theory, and that can be its own horror. One of the homicide detectives on the case, years later, said this about Philip: "I've sat across from cold men, but with him, it was different. With him, it wasn't hate, it was vacancy. Like everything about the emotional side of the world just didn't apply." That lack of emotion wasn't just present during the crimes. It lingered during phone calls. One jail phone call released under court order shows a faint audio log where Philip speaks to his lawyer. His voice was calm, low, almost bored. He asks about evidence, timelines, and forensic integrity. Says clearly they're going to have a hard time making a chain of custody argument if we go that route. It sounded less like a man awaiting justice, more like a man preparing homework. He wasn't worried about guilt or innocence. He was thinking like a student preparing an oral defense. It was intellectual, detached, like a medical exam. Even his own lawyer admitted he had a brilliant mind and a complete absence of moral compass. You could almost admire his logic if it didn't revolve around death. When the media looked deeper into Philip's life, they found more oddities. In high school, he rarely went to parties. Teachers described him as bookish, even formal at times. There were no real disciplinary actions, but one teacher noted he didn't like being corrected in public. Another story surfaced about a fellow student once beating him to a lab award. Philip's response wasn't rage. He simply stopped speaking to her completely for the rest of the year. Even when placed in a two-person team during biology rotations, he refused to utter a single word to her cold, exacting, controlled social withdrawal. A pattern began to emerge. When threatened, Philip didn't explode, he erased. And then he would reorganize, redirect, find a better angle. That behavioral trend of detachment, restructuring, and masked performance. colored most of his adult years. He managed appearances with precision. All of that came crashing down only when his killing behavior leaked outside of schedule. The fourth attack. For example, most people don't realize there was a fourth target, an unnamed woman in Rhode Island. The details of her story remain partially sealed, but what was shared is this. She had received 2 messages from a sender known as C_Pen89, requesting a massage booking at a hotel in Warwick. She replied, asked for references, and the messages stopped. Later that same day, her hotel door was found open. Security footage later showed no forced entry, but staff entered and found nothing but disorder. Drawers pulled, closet open, nothing stolen, nothing broken. But something wasn't right. She had moved rooms earlier that same day after reporting discolored water and had not yet returned to the original room. Police believe that room may have been entered by Markov. Their theory is that he'd arrived early, used a stolen employee key, and waited. When she didn't show, he left, which means, at some point, he was waiting in the closet just beyond a door, with zip ties in his pocket, gloves in his hand, and a gun in his belt. This version of him is the one sociologists struggle to label, because Markov wasn't only killing for thrill or impulse. He was building sets, practicing scenes. His crimes were structured like surgeries, sterile, silent, calculated, each attempt closer to perfection, closer to the style he wanted, but not fast enough. He was compiling crimes like data, and he was preparing for something bigger. Search histories confirmed an interest in sedation. Search histories also linked phrases like, "How long does unconsciousness last?" after strangulation, and portable methods. For disabling someone using medical tools, it's unclear how far that plan ever got. But we know this Philip had greater ambitions than people thought. He was building toward control, total control of body, room, timing, weapon, responsive, every variable, everything, until his jail cell mirrored that trajectory. But inside that cement box, there was only one variable left, and like everything else in his life, Philip needed to command the outcome. That's why it's important to look not only at the murders, but at the pattern behind them. The data arrangements, the preparation, the booking behaviors, the weapon storage, his labeling of certain map screenshots. When you line it all up, Pitt starts to look less like random killing and more like an engineering schematic. Blueprints. It's horrifying to say, but in many ways, Markov was still thinking like a med student, controlling every condition, measuring reactions, eliminating noise, minimizing trace error. He wasn't seeking loud attention. He wasn't a Zodiac, wasn't a Ripper fanatic. He didn't send letters to the press or carve symbols. He sought perfect anonymity, a shadow protocol, as some analysts called it. Slip in, do damage, exit, no signature, just void. But even in that protocol, he made mistakes. Human error, a fingerprint here, a smudge on a glove there, and those slivers of imperfection, those were his undoing. Investigators said the moment Cynthia Melton survived, Markov was doomed because she shattered the controlled script. She screamed, kicked, and witnesses heard noise, the one thing he couldn't accommodate. Noise made chaos, noise made chaos, and chaos made him sloppy. He left zip ties, he left fingerprints, and police began to follow his trail. A perfect crime isn't just clean, it's invisible. Philip's were almost invisible. Not enough to save him, but enough that we still aren't sure how many existed. Craigslist admitted at the time of the case that over 700 similar escort posts were active in the region between March and April 2009 alone. When federal agents attempted to cross-reference IP timestamps with other crimes, a disturbing overlap occurred in at least 6 cases. But not enough physical evidence was preserved. Too much time had passed. Too many victims were afraid to report. This allowed a chilling possibility that what we call the Craigslist killer may have had a wider radius, more broken lives, more victims afraid to speak after the headlines, afraid of being targeted again, or blamed, or publicly known. One anonymous forum post years later featured someone who claimed she narrowly escaped. The tall medboy with the small gun and the bruised knuckles. She gave no date, no location, just the image. Him asking her if she kept her mouth quiet when she worked. She says she walked away, lied about needing her kid upstairs, and locked the room behind her. That account was never authenticated. But the description matched, the tone matched, and even her detail. The scar on the back of his finger matched arrest photographs. If even half of the undocumented stories are true, we may never uncover the full scale of his damage. But that's the terrifying part about predator camouflage. It doesn't wave a flag. It doesn't come snarling. It comes smiling with a date. Planned suit, pressed, perfect GPA, posted on the fridge. It offers you a glass of wine and tells your parents you make him better. Predators, like Philip, spend their whole lives practicing being human until you believe them, until you let them in, and then it's already too late when you step back. The Craigslist killer story isn't just about one victim or one murder. It's about how trust gets betrayed in the most intimate way. Trust in partners, trust in instincts, trust in systems. And it's about the question that investigators still hear over and over again. 15 years later, how do you stop someone like that when you don't even know what you're looking at? The badge doesn't protect you if the killer wears a smile. The title doctor doesn't shield someone from darkness. Well-behaved isn't the same as good. An engagement ring isn't an alibi. Philip Markoff framed his entire life around symbols of decency, all-American, looks. Perfect, test results, medical brilliance, and behind it, emptiness. And when that shell cracked, it was already soaked in blood. One last note from the case file, a line written by a retired detective who visited the cell 2 days after Philip's suicide. He wrote, "I've stood in the holding cells of gang leaders, cartel fixers, abusers, rapists, and monsters. But nothing felt colder than this silence. That silence still lingers." The room was repainted. The next inmate moved in. The jail staff never spoke of the markings again, but in a small, locked evidence room, in a thin manila folder, there's a photograph of that wall. Faded red handwriting, dragging stroke pressure. One word, Megan. The name still smeared, frozen in time, like a ghost no one can touch. It's the last artifact of a man whose true self was never truly seen until he vanished. The memory of Philip Markoff faded from the front pages quickly after the shock of the arrest, the surprise of the trial delays, and the quiet horror of his suicide. News agencies moved on, but the echoes kept spreading because for a long time after the case was closed, hotels changed, Craigslist changed. The way people looked at charming, quiet men changed. This wasn't just a grim warning about trusting strangers. It was a warning about assuming you know someone just because they look right, because they sound right, because they studied medicine or wore the right shoes or said the right things to your family. The digital world had created a new weapon for predators, like Markov.anonymity.opportunity access. The case crashed into what was already a growing concern about the rise of anonymous ads. Escorts selling services behind vague language. Sites profiting from blurred lines between sex work and personal. Companionship offers. Privacy had become currency, and predators knew it. For many women, Craigslist was the only way to avoid the violence of pimps or street solicitation. It offered a sense of control. They could screen clients, set parameters, arrange settings, choose hotels, use texting apps. But Philip shattered that illusion because he didn't act like a threat. He wasn't drunk or twitchy. He didn't show up stammering or sweating. He arrived 15 minutes early, texted politely, walked with confidence, held the door, smiled, and then the mask dropped. That was something investigators realized quickly. He didn't need to de-escalate suspicious behavior because he was never perceived as suspicious to begin with. He was clean-cut, middle-class, educated, and women like Julissa saw him and thought, safe enough, normal enough, just like the others. That's what made him lethal. He was unspectacular until it mattered most. He made no threats before, made no threats after. He didn't taunt police. He didn't even use fake, flashy names. He was almost boring. But behind that boring presentation was something cold-blooded, something twisted and precise, and above all, unfinished, because Philip Markov died before anyone could fully understand how far he might have gone. Whether more victims waited, whether all planned stops ever happened, whether he was preparing something worse, no one will ever know the full extent. All we have are questions. One investigator said they believed he was planning to stretch out his attacks in 2 different states targeting anonymity zones, where video surveillance was lower and victim reporting was rare. That was the pattern they feared. He traveled often. He liked casinos, chain motels, places where high traffic meant background noise. His laptop browser saved corporate hotel Wi-Fi logins from 5 states in a 3-month period. Some had no known attacks, but that doesn't mean they were free of them. Several crime labs revisited unsolved hotel assaults in Pennsylvania and Rhode Island that bore eerie resemblances, but nothing held up to new forensic review. Statute of limitations, no remembered faces, and now no living suspect to interrogate, because maybe that was Markov's plan all along. Do as much as you can, be as invisible as possible, and if it ever starts to unravel, disappear. And that's what he did, by breaking himself, taking with him every secret, every twist, every plan. It's rare that someone dies with all their answers. Usually people confess, soften, beg, write apologies. Philip wrote a name. That's it. The lack of closure was devastating to Julissa Brisman's family. Her mother, Carmen Guzman, became a quiet warrior after the trial ended. She campaigned for better laws surrounding digital sex trafficking protections and better anonymity zones for online safety reporting. She declined most press. Only made one public statement: "I lost my world, but others don't have to." She never pursued lawsuits, never entertained documentary deals. She just worked worked to prevent this from happening again, and at the same time, Craigslist was forced to reckon with its own shadow, because this case had made their name synonymous, for a time, with murder. They removed their entire erotic services section shortly after Markov's arrest, rebranded the site's listing structure, implemented stricter flagging policies, introduced clearer logs and digital IP retention. But it didn't fix the problem. It moved it. Other platforms rose. More encrypted sites, more vague ad structures. Many sex workers lost their main safe channels of screening. In some ways, Philip Markov's crimes didn't just hurt individuals. They reverberated across platforms. They drove fear deep into the heart of digital freelancing and erased what felt like safety in anonymous connections. And the people who remember the case well still think of it when booking a hotel, reading a stranger's note, or scrolling through a client message at 10 p.m. because that's what real predators do. They don't just kill, they haunt. They leave strangers afraid of the shadow that might be behind the next well-written message. Back at Boston University, Markov's name was quietly removed from the class rosters. Previous test grades erased from public displays. Some professors who taught him were interviewed years later. One of them said he was bright, not just memorization, real comprehension. He was going to be a recent graduate I'd recommend anywhere. Another said, charming, polite, a little serious, maybe, like he wasn't there to make friends, but sharp, we never imagined. They didn't know a killer sat in row 3 with a colored pen and a copy of Human Anatomy Breakdowns in his lap. That he may have been outlining zip-tie tension strengths. In his notebook margin, he was studying for 2 things, the medical boards and something far more personal to this day. It's not clear whether he would have gone through all his exams and become a doctor even if he hadn't been caught. Was the plan to merge both lives, or to end one after graduation and move on with the other? One forensic psychologist argued that the killer life was the real one, that medicine was the costume, the way to build public cover to hide the damage. He called it lifestyle camouflage. Predators use aspirational identity to veil. Behavior.doctors.lawyers.master, students, smart suits, polite smiles, volunteer work. He said, society is obsessed with titles. We assume a man is safe because he dressed well and knew Latin names for muscles. That's the ruse. That's the trap. And no one wore their mask better than Markov, because it wasn't a permanent disguise. It was situational. He believed in it until he didn't. There's an eerie irony to how he died in a jail cell, alone. Staining the walls, collapsed on the floor beneath a single letter. The man who studied organs, who traced heartbeat signals, who identified neurological motor systems, took his own life by severing the very arteries he once diagrammed in class. It was surgical, planned, final, and everything, up until that moment, had led here. The investigators who worked the scene couldn't agree on whether he meant to die that day, specifically the anniversary, or whether it was just symbolic. But the photo says something else. A scarlet red blotch of ink on a beige jail wall, painstakingly written. Megan. He thought of her until the final moment, or wanted her to think of him. The tragedy is that he robbed her life too. She didn't die in that jail cell, but her future did. She never finished med school. She never gave another statement. The last record of contact she had with the public came from a two-sentence quote to a newspaper in 2011, saying, "No one will ever understand what I lived through. It doesn't leave you. You build another life, but you never stop waking up afraid." That's what monsters like Philip Markoff leave behind, not just victims, but damage that multiplies, traumas that echo, people blamed for things they couldn't see coming, couldn't stop. They don't just break bones, they break belief, they break safety, they break ordinary life, and they make shadows feel unsafe again. That's his true legacy. The man with the zip ties, the name on the wall, the ghost in the hotel elevator, gone but not forgotten. Years have passed since Philip Markoff last breathed. The world moved on, as it always does, but shadows linger longer than stories. And for those who lived through that year, the year of the Craigslist killer, something shifted at the core. It was more than just a crime, more than one man with a gun. It was the realization that you can live next to a killer and never know that someone can hold your hand, study anatomy beside you, kiss you on the forehead before bed, and still be planning someone else's nightmare. No one wants to believe they can be fooled like that, but that's the genius of people like Markoff. They rely on the stories. We tell ourselves that killers are obvious, that monsters leave marks, that predators snarl and skulk and flash warning signs. But what if they don't? What if they're kind, organized, charming? What if they ask you about your day? What if they carry your groceries and recommend a great place for takeout? What then? Markoff wasn't a genetic anomaly. He wasn't born a villain. He didn't wear evil in his DNA. He was made not in a lab or a swamp or a horror movie, but in quiet rooms full of quiet pressure, expectation, reputation, image, perfection, which is what makes him such a terrifying case study for criminal psychology programs around the world. His face is now in textbooks, his profile used in FBI manuals, documentaries, podcasts, case study panels, but none of it replaces what was lost. Julissa Brisman had dreams, ambitions. She wanted to finish modeling, open her own massage clinic, support her mother. She liked candles and coffee and writing short lyrics in her journal. She was trying to pay bills, not chase danger. She wasn't reckless. She wasn't naive. She checked her clients carefully, texted friends before each appointment, took pictures of license plates when she could. But Philip Markoff wasn't on anyone's radar. There was no warning, no red flag, just a knock, a smile, and the end of everything. Julissa died alone in a room, facing a stranger whose name she would never know until his mugshot lit up the sky. His fiancée never set foot in that courtroom. She couldn't or wouldn't to this day. It's unclear what she saw in the weeks before his arrest, what she heard at night, what alarms she might have buried out of love or denial. But even now, people ask the same questions. How do you live with someone, sleep beside someone, and not see who they truly are? But the uncomfortable answer: people do it all the time. Serial predators often perform flawlessly. They pass polygraphs, TARM, therapists, coach, witnesses, gaslight family members, and compartmentalize pain the way Philip did, because to him, it wasn't pain, it was purpose. The acts didn't haunt him, they seemed to energize him. It's why his demeanor in jail was so disturbing to caseworkers. He didn't express depression, he didn't rattle with guilt, he simply receded. .com are than most men arrested on drug charges. He organized his papers, filed his teeth cleaning request, wrote letters using clean block text, no mess, until the very last day, and even then, his suicide felt less like a cry and more like a calculation. He planned the cuts, collected the blades, stored the pills, folded the paper, marked the date, wrote her name like a ritual, and exited with the control he'd built his whole second life on. The reality is that evil doesn't always scream. Sometimes it whispers over Wi-Fi, into inboxes, through whispered hotel reservations. Sometimes it speaks in medical terms, smiles in family photos, feeds you breakfast. It wears credentials, posts engagement photos, shows you a ring, and says, "Trust me." But that's what makes stories like this matter, because criminal profiling isn't just about decoding killers. It's about understanding how they go unseen for so long, why it takes for victims before we notice, why we hesitate to suspect that groom-to-be instead of the man in the alley, why people like Markov meet no resistance until it's too late. He taught nothing valuable. There are no lessons to admire, but he proved how fragile safety really is. That you can nail the exam, win honors in biochem, and still loosen a shoelace into a noose, still catalog a shortlist of future victims before anatomy class, and still sit beside the love of your life while planning someone else's death. That's what's left behind now. Not a monster story, but a mirror. Because if someone like that could exist inside a smile like his, then how many others wear skin just as convincing? How many others have never slipped? And how close have we come to them? Sitting on a train, passing them on the street, swiping them in an app, letting them into our lives, our inboxers, our rooms, right now. Someone is messaging a stranger, making an appointment, choosing a hotel, filing down the edge of something sharp, changing the name in a Gmail address to something forgettable. And the pattern silently repeats. That's why these stories matter. Not because they're thrilling, or dark, or salacious, but because they pull back the veil. They revive names that might otherwise be forgotten. Names like Julissa. Names like Carmen, the mother who wept in the back of the courtroom, begging the court to remember her daughter as a person, not just evidence. Names like Megan, who buried a future instead of her own body and disappeared to rebuild a shattered life. Names that should have been unremarkable, ordinary, safe, but became etched into a scar that justice never got to close. Philip never spoke, and in that silence, some people find mystery, others just disrespect. There were families who desperately wanted to face him in court, force him to look at what he'd done, have a judge speak those final words aloud, guilty. But no sentence was ever read. No verdict ever issued, only paperwork signed by medical examiners, listing cause of death as suicide by exsanguination, blood loss, inside a jail cell, just 2 weeks before pre-trial hearings were to begin. He timed it. He didn't want the trial, didn't want the cameras, because that was never his style. He existed meticulously in shadows. Once those shadows dissolved, he followed them into nothing, and now we're left to put the puzzle back together, piece by piece, knowing full well the corners are still missing, that some questions won't be answered, that pieces are too soaked in secrecy to hold shape anymore. But we still try, because naming the void makes it smaller, because handing names back to those who lost them matters more than studying the man who took them. Julissa. We say it again. She was the one whose life spoke louder than death, whose mother never stopped building back in the wake of loss, whose memories now keep others safer. That not Markov is what remains behind. That's the part worth saying out loud. Because sometimes the darkest cases aren't about the killer. They're about the survivors, the mothers, the ex-fiancés haunted by memory, the roommates who ask themselves, could I have known? The women who never opened the door. That's what matters. Their resilience, their voices, not his cruelty, not his methods, but what rises after everything is shattered. That's what this story leaves us, because there is no clever quote to end it, no epilogue that balances the scales, only raw silence and the chance to do better, to believe someone when they say a guy gave them a bad feeling, to follow instinct before it's too late, to stop asking, why didn't she walk away? To start asking, why did he think he could get away with it? The Craigslist killer is dead, but the world he exploited is still here. Digital shadows still stretch through phones and screens and hungers. Predators don't disappear when a case is closed, and control always finds a new face to wear. But maybe, just maybe, we keep watch a little closer now. Maybe the echoes turn into shields. Maybe patterns are spotted faster. Maybe someone remembers Julissa and closes the door, makes the call, walks away. And that might be the only justice left in stories like this. Some stories don't have a full stop, just silence. Because the truth is, not all monsters get a trial. Not every victim gets justice. And not every answer comes, even when you already know who the killer is. Philip Markov took more than a life. He took closure. He took truth. And he took it with him to a jail cell floor, in silence, without confession, without apology. But maybe the story doesn't end there. Maybe it lives in the names we choose to remember. Julissa Brisman was more than a headline. She wasn't a footnote. She was a daughter, an artist, a fighter. And the pages of her story are still being written. In every woman who speaks out, in every survivor who trusts her instincts, brands her boundaries, and walks away from danger. Because sometimes justice comes not from the courtroom, but from the people who never let silence win. If this story stays with you, if it made you feel something real, then don't just watch. Stay alert, stay aware, ask questions, check in on your friends. Listen when they say they don't feel safe. And remember, danger doesn't always look like danger. Sometimes it smiles at you from across the table. Sometimes it signs a lease with you. Sometimes it asks about your day while planning your last dot. Thank you for watching. If this episode connected with you, consider clicking like, not for the algorithm, but so more people can hear stories like Julissa's. Subscribe for more true crime you've never heard before, where the real horror hides in plain sight. And tell us in the comments, what do you think creates a killer like this? What would you have done if someone like Philip had walked into your life? Until next time, stay curious, stay careful, and remember, sometimes the most dangerous killers wear the best disguises.